Hey guys, wanted to deliver a short but sweet plea disclaimer. This video originally finished its scripting in November and had sat in the sidelines between then and late April when I got to recording the lines. In that time, my targets had semi-discerned their video and were receptive to the criticisms they were given. Both of them are fully aware of my video and anticipated mine, as there might be points they aren't aware of I can bring up. I thank you both for your patience and hope you enjoy. So I woke up, trying to shake off the stiffness in my body and fight off the obnoxious demon that prevents me from acting like a functional human being. I forced myself in front of my computer and opened up Discord to see what was going on with my friends. I noticed an associate of mine promote their new video in a group server we share. The associate in question was Kagura101, who had a co-op commentary with another associate, Raven Pines. That commentary covered controversial figure Pro Jared in his review of Final Fantasy VII. I put it on in the background as I archived it on the SCC wiki, and as I transitioned on working on what was episode 12, some things about the commentary ended up sticking out to me, and after learning about how others felt about it, well, you guess where the story ends up going. Before we continue, I do want to make note of my part in this discussion. My views on Final Fantasy VII are particularly limited, only being aware of cliff notes of the original's plot, and having played it for a total of 0 hours. My role is to mainly riff on the arguments in the video and how some of them were presented. I do know other parties that wish to cover the video proper. They may talk about the lore and gameplay more than I will, so I'll link them below for you FF7 nerds. With that out the way, we'll begin my part in this game.
Ladies and gentlemen, meet Pro Jared, a name I'm sure most of you are familiar with considering he has made a lot of Final Fantasy related videos. But for those who aren't familiar with the guy, Jared is the YouTuber who is the biggest Final Fantasy fan, and he made a video reviewing a game about Final Fantasy VII, specifically the PS1 version. We watched it, and while his video can be somewhat as good overall, we still have several issues we'd like to bring up. Now, I'm gonna be skipping the intro since it's just a sponsorship.
I would also like to specify that since this is talking about the PS1 version, that means that any in-depth discussions of the remake in this video are going to be pretty much nixed out. So if by chance you wanted to hear that kind of discussion, you will be disappointed to know that we will not be divulging into that here.
I don't know who would expect discussions of the remake after Kagura had specified that Jared was reviewing the original PS1 version, or even those who knew about Jared's review before watching your video. The only reason it'd be relevant is in the case of comparing the two, but that won't happen, so this disclaimer about the remake not getting any screen time feels needless. Not helped by how the remake was only out for 2 months at the time of Jared's review, it'd likely take a bit more time for a full analysis to take place.
Sit down, stand up, pass out.
That's a new thing added to combat though. Limit breaks. As party members take damage, they build their limit break meter, which allows them to use an extra powerful ability. It's a sort of comeback mechanic when you're being beat down. Even better, you unlock several additional limit breaks as you progress throughout the game, including some hidden secret ones, making sure that limit breaks don't fall behind in power. And it works so successfully here that it's essentially reused to some degree in several Final Fantasy games after this.
So, fun fact, the limit break system is actually an improvised version of Final Fantasy VI Desperation attacks, although admittedly the conditions are so rare that you can play the Final Fantasy VI whole game without seeing one.
To summarize what the Desperation attack is in terms of mechanics, basically, it's unlockable and ignores defense since the only time that this ability is used is when a character in a party is in critical status with a 1 in 16 chance for that to occur. The only statuses that the character may have that omit the ability to do a Desperation attack are Confuse, Image, Vanish, and Zombie. Showing us some gameplay footage from my PS5 to make sure that the Genki Shadowcast is working for both my Switch and my PS5, and as you can see here, it's been working quite well. But hey, it's me, Raven Pines. I am the co-op partner for the video that I'm doing with Kagura101. So I wanted to demonstrate how the limit break system works in the original Final Fantasy VII. I know there was like a big explanation on the Desperation attacks, but I figured just for the sake of brevity and for the sake of education, I figured that I might want to show some footage to demonstrate how the limit break system works. So anytime a character in a party is hit so many times stacked whenever you use a limit break, like with Cloud here, for example, so when you're at level 1, you have Braver, but when you reach different levels, like say level 2, for example, because that's where I'm at, you get this thing called Cross Slash. And what that does is it crosses the sword towards the enemy, and this is how Braver works here, ladies and gentlemen. Basically, Sword of powers up before slicing through an enemy with his Buster Sword. I know this is a terrible way of explaining it, but I figured that this would help slightly a bit for those who are uninitiated. Aerith's breaking limit break here is healing Wind. Since Aerith is basically the healer, it's supposed to heal all members of the party, but not Cloud because he's dead at this point in the battle. He's knocked down by that giant fucking mouse over here. So I guess this is a good little explanation on how the limit break system works and how it is used. The limit breaks can depend on any character, you know, like for Barret, it's Fake Shot, and for limit breaks can vary from character to character depending on the weapons that they use and what kind of magical abilities that they have. Like with Aerith, I believe that she's a healer, maybe Conra can, or anyone else in the comment section can correct me on that. Anyways, we're gonna get back to our regularly scheduled commentary.
Now sure, there was a lot of differences in them that make the limit break feel like a new inclusion to the franchise. Like how 6 only works while you're at brink of death, while limit breaks builds up over time as you take damage. But they're both combat mechanics at the end of the day.
Purpose? What even was the point of this cutaway? Are you trying to say limit breaks weren't introduced because of the existence of Cid's Desperation attacks? Because I dislike that for a couple reasons. By your admission, you can play Final Fantasy VI in whole without even using one Desperation attack. Meanwhile, limit breaks are much more accessible in 7's battle system and have a greater chance of being performed. The amount of differences can also make limit breaks feel like a new mechanic altogether, so it wouldn't be wrong to say limit breaks were introduced in Final Fantasy VII, making this cutaway totally pointless. Speaking of pointless, Waven, why did you attempt to show us what limit breaks are, only to just say exactly what Joe had said in more rambly words? That was 2 minutes of time spent on absolutely nothing but to test out your capture card footage. Why Kagura allowed this is beyond me.
Plus, whenever party members switch out, the pain of having to shift around and re-equip every single goddamn one can get to be real arduous.
There's an arrange button in the material menu that allows you to swap the material between characters super easy.
Question, what if he doesn't have it? The exchange option Kagura brings up is present in what the wiki dubs the international version. However, accessible versions, meaning the Final Fantasy VII you can get on current consoles, were technically based on the original release which didn't have that option. It is worth noting that there was a PlayStation Classic port which is based on the international version, and since Kagura's example was apparently from a PlayStation, it's likely the version detects for the PlayStation users. However, we don't know what version Jared has, and his footage shows that he does have to unfortunately slot materia manually, which means it's possible for others on versions other than PlayStation to run into the same circumstance.
Now you can argue that he didn't know about this feature, but here's the kicker. If a game like this provides you an easy way to make the combat better or helps your party get the stuff that is necessary for them in battle, then chances are it's a good idea to point that out instead of glancing over it.
I wasn't sure how to incorporate this into my original cutaway, but then I remembered Waven's incredibly confusing point, and that's when it all clicked. So when I originally scripted my last night section, I was under the impression that both the person in Kagura's example and Jared clicked on the materia, which had one displayed the arrange menu while the other sent you to the materia sidebar. And this actually led me to the point of discovering if there were alternative versions of the game. However, another associate, Daisy Foxtrot, brought to my attention that the way the menu popped up in Kagura's example was by clicking on arrange, meaning it's actually a button. And as she would point out in the comments, how would you gather that it's a clickable button? I didn't even realize that you could. The game's UI doesn't make them distinctive from being simple labels. And that's when we come back to Waven's awful point. If the game doesn't make these options clear to the player, blaming them for glancing over it when they had no way of knowing is a damn dickish thing to do.
So many of them can be done away with, it would only smooth out the pacing. Almost every minigame is too easy, so it hardly feels rewarding. And to be frank, all of Final Fantasy VII is too easy. For how much forethought you can have with equipment and materia setups going into any battle, very little of it matters. The bosses that show up hardly pose any threat of any kind, and almost never require any kind of strategy or interesting tactics. A lot of them also die so quickly, right down to the very final disappointing boss. It isn't as easy as, say, the SNES version of Final Fantasy IV, but 7 is easier than all of the other ones.
Okay, we'll admit that this point at least have some ground to stand on considering the amount of customization the material system gives gives you can make the game easy to beat due to the amount of broken builds you can make there, but there are still issues we'd like to bring up. For example, the game only becomes easy if you're incredibly patient and have a long history of playing JRPGs, and if you're a relatively new player or impatient player, it can be difficult to beat, and while veterans are allowed to think it's too easy, at the end of the day, it all comes down to player skill and the type of game someone's good at.
Kagawa, this is Deflection. You can't just say Final Fantasy VII isn't easy because of inexperienced players that might be getting into it. Not only because it is still ignoring the people who are experienced in RPGs, like the person you're doing this commentary on, but it won't hold up when you consider one basic fact. Those broken builds from the materia system you mentioned, those inexperienced players have access to those, and will use them to break the game and complete it as fast as possible. I would know. That's how my time of RPGs went when I started the genre. Those inexperienced players won't stay that way. They're going to learn more about the game and get through it the same way the experienced players will.
The mini games are dumb, but the gameplay is still very good. Final Fantasy VII is fun to play. When I think about its legacy, though, its gameplay has very little to do with it. What elevates Final Fantasy VII into reverence for so many people is its story. Do I give a spoiler alert here? Like, are there spoilers? We all know it by now, right? Like, do I even bother trying to explain? Whatever, I'm going into spoiler territory.
I actually don't like the phrase "we all know it by now" being used here. This implies that everyone is expected to know what happens in terms of the story and ignores a lot of other factors.
No, that is outright wrong. You're deliberately isolating that one statement and ignoring the parts about how he literally gives the spoiler warning, giving those that don't have said knowledge enough time to back out. This is reading far too deep into something that is ultimately meant as a segue.
Consider the following. What if they are new to the franchise or just new to the game in general?
Then they can click off because Jared has gone over the gameplay enough for someone like that to gauge whether or not they'd want to play it. And of course, that implies said person would necessarily care, but that's beside the point.
What if they haven't played the game in years and they needed to refresh their memory?
Then why would they be concerned about this? They know the story. They're part of the world and you're isolating. What does factoring that in even accomplish?
These are some of the things that you need to take into consideration, especially when giving out potential spoiler warnings.
Now, you could argue that Jared gives a spoiler warning anyway, and the new people who want to experience the story can end the video there.
Thanks for acknowledging me, Kagawa. I feel really special now.
But like Raven said, the way Jared the phrase "we all know it by now" implies that everyone expected to know what happens. Him giving her spoiler warning doesn't matter if the phrase implies something else.
So not only is this not an argument against the counter you're trying to address, because it skirts around how new people still understand how it's going into spoilers, this makes no damn sense. This argument is now turned into, while we know you gave a spoiler warning, you said everyone should know the story and that's a problem, which is a non-issue, frankly. Here's a counter about the phrase. What if it's hyperbole? Not like it's invalid hyperbole, since we're talking about Final Fantasy VII, one of the most well-known games, and what has already had some of its big story beats spoiled anyway. On top of that, him giving the spoiler warning is acknowledging those that might not know it, making your entire cutaway incredibly unwarranted.
That also doesn't necessarily mean that a game or any piece of media is considered bad in the first place. Hint, hint.
Oh. Vague posting! Hooray! A couple of things. This statement is unrelated to what was being talked about and just feels like an unneeded jab against the person who made the tweet. On the subject of that, this jab also isn't going to work when most of your audience isn't going to understand who this is referencing or its significance. I know who said that, and yeah, it's garbage, but they don't have much of presence on Twitter, nor prompted a particularly big argument, so it's piss poor as a reference. TLDR, never do this again.
As for the rest of the cast, well, they're either bland, unlikable, and all underdeveloped. It's real rough. The only honest good characters are Cloud and Aerith. Tifa has some good merits, but she's aware that Cloud isn't telling the truth all the time and only enables him, making things way worse. She has a flimsy excuse of not lying to hurt him when she finally confronts his delusions, but by then it's far too late.
Oh. So this is where the big shoe dropped, huh? I'll just step to the side here.
In the name of all third-class soldiers, cease!
Oh. Huh. So, the least unfortunate thing about this
In the name of the great bakery in the sky, cease!
Now I do want to acknowledge that Kagura did address this in the comments, and apologize for it, and I'll even say that referencing other commentators isn't a problem, so long as you can put in a unique spin or a link where your joke comes from. This didn't do much of either other than change what you're calling to, making it nothing but a weaker version of Zenny's joke. However, my main problem isn't the plagiarism, but rather the presentation. The build-up was at a decent pace and Waven played off it fairly enough, but the payoff is sadly weak. The setup was supposed to emphasize that Jared's take at least frustrated you, yet your big blow-up sounds like you're trying to hold back laughter, not helped by how once you deliver your point, it sounds just as normal as you do in the rest of your video.
For one, Tifa being enabled wasn't intentional. She wanted to help Cloud, which is why she proceeded Cloud with questions about the past or how she feeling more than anyone else. She avoided asking and answering too many big questions, firstly out of the misguided fear that he'd break if he learned the truth, since Cloud's sense of identity and self-worth was so fragile,
making the entire setup feel totally pointless, as we don't even get what should be your cathartic release of Anchor. It's now just stale, pondering its own existence. If you want to do this type of thing, it'll require you to exaggerate your acting a little. You don't need to be yelling at the top of your lungs or something, but if you're going to make this build up about how you're frustrated at what you just heard, you should follow that up with a point that sounds like you're frustrated.
For one, Tifa being enabled wasn't intentional. She wanted to help Cloud, which is why she proceeded Cloud with questions about the past or how she feeling more than anyone else.
I'm not gonna cover the rest, as I don't feel like covering the story beats here, but this one line does bother me. Intent doesn't matter when someone's caught an enabler. If she did actions that enabled Cloud's behavior, then she did them. They can be seen as justifiable, but they can still be criticized for her involvement.
Barret, while remarkably the first major black character in Final Fantasy, falls into being a stereotype. His relationship with Marlene is used more as a prop for himself than genuine development, and any growth he goes through stops after you get to the third town.
Barret is not just a walking stereotype. Sure, he can come off as one in the beginning, but his motivations and the character development go on well past Ghost Saucer. In the first flashback of Corel,
Barret apparently wasn't the same person as he's portrayed in the start of the game. When Corel was destroyed, he blamed Shinra to absolve himself of the role he played in it, and later went on to lead Avalanche to retaliate against him in vengeance. He would hold conflictions about his actions in Midgard, especially after the loss of his comrades and many innocent people. And while he initially denied any wrongdoing because of his blind vengeance, he would later admit that Avalanche's actions weren't justified in sacrificing innocent lives by saying it's for saving the planet. Dale, you were saved a minute, and I'll explain why I did that in just a second.
Not only that, but even in the part from the pursuit of Sephiroth,
He explained how he got his gun arm after the group was thrown in the Corel prison. They then confronted Dane, the prison leader who also had a gun arm and was responsible for the Gold Saucer massacre, and after defeating him, Barret continued traveling with the group in pursuit of Sephiroth. He also consoled Cloud after Elle's death, even while being aware that Cloud was vulnerable to Sephiroth. You're probably wondering why I opted to cut out their explanations and replace them with my own. Simple. Their explanations frankly sucked. They're very clunky, focus on irrelevant details, and do a poor job at explaining the relevance to Barret. Kagura floats on 3 points for an entire minute, and Waven omits a number of details that could be related to Barret, like his relationship with Dane, the fact that he fought Dane alone, and why Dane is fighting him, to instead mention Scarlet offhandedly, and the fact the group was offered a buggy to leave the prison. They aren't presented in a way that gives the audience information naturally and can make them confused with unrelated details that don't get properly explained. However, the bigger problem is how neither of these are going to contest the claim that Barret is a stereotype. Why yes, the old Asian man is a hermit, a master martial artist, and a heterosexual pervert. But it's all good because he set trans rights, saved 20 children from a burning building, and helped the main rival escape from a dark place. That's not how you argue. Pointing to Barret's motivations in an event he took place in won't erase how he can still be seen as a stereotypical character. Surprisingly, the two can coexist, because the focus would be on Barret's characteristics like his personality, behavior, and interactions with other cast members. And looking up what's been said about his representation, yeah, it's pretty rough. Now, although being stereotypical can be a flaw, it can be overlooked if the traits highlighted aren't exclusive to Barret or only in small doses throughout the game. But that isn't what your droid soldiers gave me. Instead, you responded to critiques of Barret's character by bringing up Barret's plot points. Nice showing.
Yuffie and Vincent are hardly fleshed out or considered bonus characters so much that they don't even appear in any cutscene.
Did you forget the Vincent and Yuffie high side quest that fleshed him out?
Kagura will then go on to explain the side quests of Wutai Village and Lucerina's quest from the Final Fantasy fandom wiki practically verbatim. I want to clarify that I'm not making this point to claim plagiarism or to say that using the wiki is poor practice. I'm pointing this out because I honestly don't get why Kagura will present his point like this. I could literally make the same point by just telling Joe that Vincent and Yuffie have side quests that flesh them out with these explanations on screen as I say it and save us, again, a minute. If I can suggest a better alternative, at least in my opinion, after bringing up the side quests, flash the explanations while you expand on how Yuffie and Vincent were fleshed out through them. It gives your audience a fair bit of information while providing your counter. In fact, how they were fleshed out will be paramount here, considering the key phrase in Joe's complaint is hardly fleshed out. He might be fully aware of these side quests and believe they did a poor job at fleshing them out. Considering he talked about how he enjoyed the game's super bosses, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility.
There's another thing to consider here, that being how they're optional characters.
Given he called Yuffie and Vincent bonus characters, I'm pretty sure he's aware of that and takes umbrage with that too. But go off, I guess.
You can choose them for them not to appear in the cutscenes. That's not the fault of the game, nor does it make the brand unwhackable.
Why does it matter that them being in cutscenes is optional when them not showing up is still true in a sense and can be seen as a complaint? How come we can't blame the game for making two characters not matter so much that they don't appear in any cutscenes or appear in the ending FMV no less? Especially in a game that's in a genre where character building is a pretty big draw. How come we can't call underdeveloped characters bland? Where did you get the notion that Jared was talking about Yuffie and Vincent being unlikable when he said nothing denoting that? This entire argument fucking sucks.
If they were major characters that weren't written all that well, it would be understandable, but since they are optional characters, this complaint doesn't make any sense.
How come optional characters are allowed to be poorly written? That's what you just claimed with that interjection. The idea that only major characters should be judged for their writing. Oh, I guess every following character shouldn't matter in the story unless they're a lord, retainer, or the protagonist. Reminder that we're talking about an RPG game and that Yuffie and Vincent aren't just random side characters. They're playable characters that should have some incentivization for keeping around. And since you both went on a tangent about how Yuffie is totally good, you better have some reasoning on why we should care about her now.
And Sid, he isn't the grumpy but lovable old man trope. He's an abusive prick who continues to be abusive to the very end. Even when his close assistant is trying to help and do what's best, even saving his life, he'd rather belittle her than say thanks.
Sid is one of the most liked characters for a reason. He transformed from a hopeless, angry person into one who has to take a position of the leadership. See, in Act 3, Turmoil, after Tifa finds Cloud in mid-L, Tifa leaves the party and Sid becomes the party leader for 2 missions, struggle for the huge materia mind you. He also comes into terms to realize that the issue with his determination and the reality of his assistant slapping him in the face. He is forced to come to terms that she was right, and he does apologize. Although I will admit that when he did apologize, he said sorry. At the end, like a child being forced to apologize, so it didn't really come as a sincere sense. It was also tackled at the end of an insult.
So his apology was not genuine and only given due to him being in trouble. Do you even understand how you've not argued against what Joe just talked about? Never mind your first point, which feels like a damn footnote about Sid being a leader. The point that is related just falls flat due to how Sid lacks sincerity in his apology for his behavior, meaning there's no reason to believe he's still not going to be abusive. I don't get how you looked at this point and thought it worked.
Even with that in mind, yes, he can be really angry, but just because someone is angry doesn't automatically mean they are dicks. Like, yeah, he is known to swear in anger, but that shows us that he is human, and humans are prone to be emotional like that.
Now we're just downplaying Jared's statements. Raven, he was called abusive. That's a far cry from just anger. If you're trying to say Jared is wading too deep into Sid's actions, you're gonna need to demonstrate that. Otherwise, you're just strawmanning. Something tells me this commentary needed another laugh. This post point also doesn't add anything. It just seems like you two discovered Jared's claim of Sid being abusive held some ground, but still wanted to write it off for unspecified character development and an apology you dingleberries still admit is not sincere, as if it would mean anything. Sloppy work from the both of you.
Even someone like Zack, who became a very popular character, even though he has a grand total of like 6 throwaway lines in the entire game. Nothing can be gleaned from them other than he is a Cloud with black hair.
Cloud with black hair. Zack is just Cloud with black hair. What? I can't wait for this big...
She's gonna continue on that for a bit to make some lackluster joke that will look really unfortunate when I finish the cutaway. So we'll just move on to the points.
Zack is the first third-class soldier and Cloud's best friend during the time of working for the Schindler Electric Car Power Company. He wielded the iconic Buster Sword, which he would pass it to Cloud after, spoiler alert, sacrificing himself.
Kagawa, you aren't even trying now. Also, this means nothing. Lone Wine, 2 interjections.
Regardless of the number of throwaway lines he has, he still plays a major role in part of the story and has a big impact on Cloud himself. Now, we won't deny that Zack doesn't appear much, but even then, that doesn't change the fact that he has his own legacy.
That's great, Waven. Is that relevant to OG FO7 though? No is the answer to that question. Lord Wine, the next interjection.
If you were talking about Zack not having much personality, then 1. You were really vague on that aspect, and 2. You worded yourself very poorly considering your words were, and I quote, Zack became a popular character despite his 6 throwaway lines. Nothing can be gleaned for that other than he's just Cloud with Zack here. The way you worded it made it seem like you were talking about Zack's legacy, and if somehow you were referring to something else, that this is another case of poor wording on your part.
Ah, jeez. Zack became a popular character, which just means he garnered high favor from people, despite having 6 throwaway lines, which implies his lines meant nothing to the story. Nothing can be gleaned from them, which means they had no meaning to his character, other than he's a Cloud with black hair, which means he's just a clone of Cloud with no standout traits. I don't like spoon-feeding this explanation to you, but it feels like you turned your brain off and didn't even bother examining his statement. The claim of it being poorly worded also falls flat because it ignores how Jared has been talking about their characterization for the past few minutes. However, here's the big kicker that makes this entire interjection funny. Kagawa, remember the line you parroted from the wiki? Notice what is right above it. The fact that in the game, he was a flashback character that was practically identical to Cloud. Yeah, that's just embarrassing.
This game lacks interesting characters, but what of Sephiroth, the same breakout star alongside Cloud? He's memorable mostly because of his appearance. His bare chest, long white hair gives him the same physical traits that a typical hero would. He's far prettier than any other antagonist before him. A stupidly long sword to reflect Cloud's stupidly big sword gives him additional coolness factor. He just looks cool, but he isn't interesting. The build-up before he finally appears takes a very long time. He isn't a constant threat to the party, but rather a myth told to you over and over, and therein lies a weak storytelling choice. Telling, not showing. You are told how great and powerful Sephiroth is. In the instances where it is shown, such as in flashbacks, don't portray him as a big bad threat properly. And the times where Sephiroth does appear to confront your party, it isn't actually him, just some different Cell of Genova alien taking his place. He has some powerful, memorable moments, absolutely. But as a fleshed out character, he falls flat.
There's literally a cutscene where Sephiroth literally showcases his powers.
That was literally addressed, Kagawa. Jared felt it didn't convey him as a threat properly. And I'm not sitting through your explanation of the cutscene that I can see with my damn eyes.
In other words, Sephiroth is overpowered in this case. Even if he isn't, he is still shown to be a bigger threat to Cloud because, as I said before, Cloud is still susceptible to Sephiroth's influence. So this whole thing about Sephiroth being a myth told to the player over and over again doesn't make sense in this context.
Raven, I'm curious what dimension you live in while correlation works in the manner you believe it to. You just tried countering the notion that Sephiroth is told as a myth to the player by bringing up how Sephiroth has influence over Cloud's mind. Not only is it not congruent with Jared's complaint with Sephiroth's level of threat to the party, but your argument can be disputed by how Jared brings up that a number of times when Sephiroth is present that it tends to be Genova's doing, thus rendering that point moot.
And I can't help but feel that he's really silly sometimes. Like, even after he kills Aerith, he just kind of stands there like a dingus the whole time, then inexplicably pirouettes away. Or that time in the Nibelheim basement where he confronts Cloud, yeets a materia at him like a baseball, and then planks away. There is a lot of ridiculous, I cannot take this seriously, moments with him like that.
So, just because the animation was limited at the time, that means it automatically makes Sephiroth look silly.
That is a blatant straw man and an asinine excuse to make. Limited animation doesn't mean someone can't criticize it for not looking particularly great.
Great argument there. 10 out of 10. Would sip again.
Did you forget you're covering our review?
Maybe in today's hindsight, sure, but you have to remember that 3D games and animations of that quality were new and limited at the time.
You're just reiterating what Raven said, and since you are, that still doesn't mean anything. A game can still get across something serious with limited animation. The first Tomb Raider comes to my mind. It was able to convey all it needed to without looking silly. at least to me. Something looking silly is rather subjective after all.
And if you want to argue that this is a joke,
No! Why is he not allowed to find the animation silly? What about him thinking that Sephiroth can't be taken seriously at points makes you think he's joking? Did you actually forget you're covering a review? I'm skipping the rest of this interjection. Reacquaint yourselves with the meaning of subjectivity.
Broccoli, coconut hot dog.
Also, the ending sucks. It completely lacks a denouement. There's no epilogue or feeling of closure or a glimpse into their post-conflict lives. Meteor is stopped, Aerith makes a brief appearance to remind you she was murdered, and then credits. You're left with the feeling of, oh, that's it? After the dozens of hours and personal investment sunk into the story.
okay, this is getting stupid. Aerith doesn't reappear at the end to remind you she was murdered.
Hyperbole.
It's to show that she was the one who was directly involved after last week to save everyone's life. Even after her death, she tried her best to follow her people's legacy and to save the world and the people she loved so much.
And presuming Jared's quip isn't hyperbole and he genuinely doesn't know that, how would he, or anyone else for that matter, be able to gauge that was the reason she appeared? I know an answer, and you likely do too, but you don't explain what that is. Way to go.
Also, who says that the PS1 version of FF7 had to have an epilogue or even a look at the characters' lives in the aftermath? It's possible that the team had an epilogue in mind and even a scene from the aftermath, but they had to scrap those because they wanted to save space since the hardware the game was made with was very limited at the time it was in development, or they wanted to leave what happened after that up to people's interpretation to get the audience to use their imagination. While you are free to be disappointed by the lack of an epilogue and aftermath scene, the possibilities are still there.
Any proof of these being the intentions of the developers? These are just baseless assumptions with absolutely nothing backing them. Cool. Also, I do love the disregard of Jared's opinion of wanting an epilogue to get some closure for the story. Keeping it classy.
Keep in mind, most of my criticisms of the characters is just how they are in the original PS1 game. Many of these characters become more fleshed out, more realized thanks to the slew of additional games and movie taking place in the Final Fantasy VII universe. That's what made them more believable and more interesting. The original game doesn't do it well enough, with a few exceptions.
Well, aside from Red 13, Kate Sith, and the side characters, you were wrong on other characters, and you seem to dislike it without knowing their important histories.
Because fuck the notion that he interpreted them differently from you. And did you not at all recognize that he was talking about their personalities and characteristics? No wonder these arguments were so bad. Since it needs explaining, you can dislike how a character acts regardless of their role in the story, Kagura. Goddamn.
It also doesn't help that you should have made the disclaimer at the beginning of the problem with the game. This whole, keep in mind, my problem with this is just how they are in the PS1 game.
Why should he have? Up to this point, we've been clearly talking about the OG FF7 fine. It should have been clear that it's about the OG. And it makes sense for him to say it here. He brings it up to transition to how he felt the extra stories Final Fantasy VII would get improved on the characters forward. Your suggestion makes him bring up how his issues with the characters are only present in the OG game and get better and more promotional material before transitioning back to talking about the issues he has with them in the OG, thoroughly mangling the flow of his explanation. Did you even account for that when you made this point?
And I know you were gonna say something about the other discs and the movie amongst the spin-offs in another section, but wouldn't this make the people looking to the other stuff in that field completely lost or look like they found the wrong thing here without the knowledge of the original PS1 game? I don't know, just throwing this out there.
I'm gonna need you to stop blowing shit out there if this is the end result. Raven, what the fuck are you talking about? We are 23 minutes into Jared's review where he has talked about how OG FF7 came into the world, the development history of original FF7, the gameplay of original Final Fantasy VII, and the story and characters of original Final Fantasy fucking 7. Who in the great evermore fuck is going to get to this point and be like, oh, that's weird, weren't we talking about Dirge of Cerberus? I want to know these imaginary people you're talking for that are frankly this damn stupid.
One Winged Angel is the perfect track to bring the feeling of gravity to a final boss fight. It's imposing, unsettling, and makes the player feel underprepared. There's a great interview with Nobuo Uematsu on how he created the song by making dozens of 2 to 4 measures of music and then placing them together like a puzzle. It's a fascinating thing to learn about, and I highly recommend it. Having vocals like that show up in a video game soundtrack, much like the rest of the game, blew people's expectations away. It's too bad Sephiroth is so easy that he dies before you can barely hear it.
Oh, so you are willing to sign an interview a one-winged angel, but not the other interview from the earlier section of the review?
Yes.
Also, I love how you went on to say that Sephiroth is easy with no explanation of that's why it's the case, which is a problem since people who haven't played the game might wrongfully agree with you without knowing the details. If you're gonna say that something is hard or easy, at least go into depth of what makes this thing hard easy. Okay, I don't know how I just literally just noticed this last minute, but he actually did explain why that's the case with his earlier complaints about the material system, which allows for a lot of weird broken builds, and how that made all the story bosses easy, including Sephiroth. But we also addressed his earlier complaint. Just throwing this out there, just in case.
This video really needed another laugh. So you make the point about how Joet doesn't explain how Sephiroth is easy, realize you are wrong about that, and just add in a post point about it while keeping in that interjection. Why? Not only is the point invalid, the post point, even ignoring how I debunked it earlier, adds nothing to the video. It should have been outright removed. In fact, this entire cutaway should have been axed. It's more hard than Mr. A's doppelganger.
Altogether, Final Fantasy VII is pretty good. The core gameplay is great, even though it has obnoxious and unnecessary minigames, a couple of excellent characters, although the rest of them fall flat, some incredible, memorable moments, but otherwise suffers from weak storytelling. I don't think Final Fantasy VII is the best one ever. So how is it that Final Fantasy VII became so massively popular? Well, that's easy. Marketing. Squaresoft put a budget the size of a behemoth behind Final Fantasy VII in the West. They really wanted to make this one a blowout success. To do this, they showcased one big thing and one thing only: its graphics from its cutscenes. Every single advertisement and commercial showed Final Fantasy VII in some sort of CG cutscene, making the graphics mind-blowing. Remember, this kind of 3D visuals wasn't feasible on a home console, and people didn't widely own high-powered PCs. They didn't show the LEGO-like overworld character models or the rather crusty and awkward animations. It was all high-octane, high-fidelity polygons, baby. More importantly, to get people to play Final Fantasy VII, in every single advertisement, they refused to mention one single word: RPG. RPGs were so incredibly niche in the US and even more so in Europe. To show it was an RPG immediately narrowed the people who would be interested in it. Hundreds of thousands of people wanted to play Final Fantasy VII because they saw good graphics, an interesting setting, and cool-looking characters. No one knew what kind of game it was, but they wanted to buy it and play it, and it worked.
Not gonna lie to you, you had us at the first part, since yes, 3D cutscenes of that quality were new, and seeing a video game having 3D graphics of that quality at a time would get a lot of people excited. But then you bring up the marketing being the reason why Final Fantasy VII became successful, when marketing has been a thing for a while now. Other video game companies has done the same thing, whether it be graphics, gameplay, or storyline, etc.
That is irrelevant, Kagawa. Joet didn't say Square invented marketing. He said Square gave Final Fantasy VII good marketing.
The reason why Final Fantasy VII was so successful was also because apparently a lot of people liked the game. So Squaresoft naturally released a spin-off and movies all about the Final Fantasy lore.
And how did a lot of people learn of Final Fantasy VII, Kagawa? Because it didn't get attention from being shadow dropped on game shows in 1997.
Marketing for games in the method that Square Enix did is not really uncommon, especially for their other games in both Western and Japanese markets. Square has also been known for marketing its games to those markets for different reasons aside from cool graphics alone.
Why does that matter? Joet brought up how Final Fantasy VII was marketed by its graphics because that's how Square chose to do it. What is happening?
I know this game came way after FF7, but I still want to use this as an example.
Raven, even for the fucked up point you're trying to make, you're saying Square's marketing of Final Fantasy VII isn't new because of how they market games after the fact. I have no idea how to elaborate on this further without implying that you don't understand how the passage of time works.
Kingdom Hearts has been marketed heavily from development all the way to its release, and the reason the marketing for that became so successful was that it appealed to two different geographical demographics for two different reasons. It even shows in the types of commercials for the game that would air on TV back in the day. The marketing for KH in the West solely focused on the Disney aspect because, well, it's obvious. Disney had a big influence on entertainment in the West. So much so that Square wanted to tell Western audiences, hey, your favorite Disney characters are in this game! You should buy it!
Never know who you'll run into next. Kingdom Hearts, PlayStation
I'm so glad that the claimed Square marketed Kingdom Hearts by saying Disney characters would be in the game was something that required a clip. No, really, I appreciate the amount of trust you have in my intelligence, truly. But since you are showing out this clip, I remember my favorite Disney characters like Riku and Kairi and Sephiroth and Sora and Eddie Murphy. How did you find the least helpful clip for a no shit statement? Did you put in effort?
Whereas commercials for the game in Japan mainly focus on characters like Sora, Kairi, and Riku.
Focuses on Sora, Riku, and Kairi. First for establishing shots went to Genie Jafar and Master TP10's power up. No, she's not wrong. I just have to find some humor here. We're almost through the interjection.
I know the discussion is mostly focused on marketing a game for cool graphics, but that stuff can really captivate a lot of people. I apologize for this tangent, but I thought I could explain how marketing from different angles works.
I hope y'all didn't think me telling her to stop throwing shit out there was just a joke. Holy shit.
You could argue that Kingdom Hearts came out in 2002, a time where 3D games were more common, so hyping up the 3D graphics wouldn't be as impressive as it is now, and you'd be correct.
No, you wouldn't. What the fuck? Graphical fidelity has always been a selling point for games. Fuck, Final Fantasy X is right there. A game that was 100% known for breaking the graphical mold. It even had titties on the cover. Even now with things like 4D motion and ray tracing, I can't tell you a single time when 3D graphics wouldn't be impressive unless that explicitly wasn't their selling point. What the hell, Kagura?
But her point is that Squaresoft is known for marketing their games for different reasons aside from cool graphics alone. And Raven's example proves that.
Redundant wording aside, that's great, Kagura. Why are you clarifying this when Raven made it quite clear that's what her point was going for? And why against a point that no reasonable person would make since it wouldn't counter Raven at all? I'm genuinely curious, what dimension are you two from where correlation works in the way y'all believe it does?
God, I can't believe I talked about Kingdom Hearts one time in a Final Fantasy related video.
And it was completely superfluous. Here's your weapon. GG.
I like Final Fantasy VII. It's very good. I do feel it's a bit overrated in general, but that doesn't make it a bad game. Far from it. It's nostalgic too and cherished by a lot of people. And that's why there is this singular, undeniable fact about Final Fantasy VII. It's the most important one. Look at how many people never played a single RPG before Final Fantasy VII. Look at how many people never even heard of the Final Fantasy series before it. It changed the industry. Before, platformers were the #1 genre people wanted to play. After Final Fantasy VII, it became RPGs, and that hasn't changed since. Games were changed to be bigger, longer, trying to outdo it. It was thanks to this game that suddenly hundreds of RPGs that were multiple discs long were considered the norm and desirable. Blah, 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 but without Final Fantasy 1, there wouldn't be a certain. Shut up. That's not the discussion. Final Fantasy VII paved the way for these grand, story-rich games to be console sellers. Final Fantasy VII also further skyrocketed the PlayStation 1, and the console's deep library of RPGs made it crush the Nintendo 64. Not just here, but in Japan too. N64 owners were envious of the RPGs that Sony was getting, that they were desperate for anything. That's how we got Quest 64. And there were adverts directly making fun of how such a big, impressive game could never even fit onto a Nintendo 64 cartridge. It used the console war to its advantage and changed a lot of people's lives. And for all the new players, maybe it was the marketing that worked on them, or just the shiny graphics, or just the anime style, or just the cool and/or hot boys that got them to play it. So what? Who cares? They still discovered their love and appreciation for RPG gameplay, immersive storytelling, and letting games have emotions. It is deeply connected to the childhood for a lot of people. Much like how Final Fantasy 1 and Final Fantasy 6 helped shape me into the kind of person I am today, Final Fantasy 7 did the same thing for way, way more people. Look at how long people were calling for a remake. Ever since it was used for just a tech demo for the PlayStation 3 in 2005, there was a demand for it. People lost their minds, wanting to see their childhoods and their emotional selves displayed how they imagined it when they first played the game. Every E3 since that one in 2005, people always brought up a potential remake for Final Fantasy 7. It truly does not matter if it's really the best one or not. It's because of Final Fantasy 7 we have the fanbase and the numerous sequels that we do today.
Good to know that you acknowledge the game's importance in video game history. That's a plus.
That was a Blaze the Movie fan interjection. I hope you realize that. Raven, Kagura, your final thoughts. They're long, and kinda condescending, and filled with invalid points. Say what you will about how I'm probably one of the least qualified people to tell them to shorten their tangents, but mine tend to be long because I have several unique points on top of one another, including some that weren't made before. Kagura felt the need to bring up several points that he'd addressed previously, all of them being pretty bad, including the point he said was invalid through his post point.
To how you say that the bosses are easy without any explanation that why that's the case.
Big yikes. But after those are done, we get no Sephiroth, body pillows, and Key being a simp. Don't ask. So, conclusion. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. This video was pretty bad. I ended up covering a lot more than I thought I was. I'm willing to let this slide as this being an off day for both of you, but there's a lot of really fundamental mistakes done here. Misinterpretations, points that add nothing to the discussion, letting content soar over your head, and a lot of unnecessary filler. I can't really come up with solid advice, as it was mainly just a video filled with bad points in presentation, and telling you to pay better attention to your video is, well, no shit. I guess I'll end with this. I know you two can do better. Raven, you make videos that I've enjoyed, and Kagura, you're still getting your sea legs, so to speak, but I see more than enough potential for you to create great work. You do have the editing down. Just keep grinding, soldiers. You'll be ready for those bosses in no time. I didn't build any skit for this video. The obnoxious demon disappeared, and I don't know how to transition to the end card. Barret has beautiful eyes. Bye.